day, grade 12. Welcome to the Kuier Rapport Matriekklas 2021. I'm Carmichelle Fransch. I do English First Additional Language. The object of today's lesson is elements of a short story and exam skills, and this will be lesson number 8. Okay, right. So, short story and the drama makes up paper 2, right? And I know from experience that learners struggle a little bit with paper 2. So what I've done here, I've not taken all the short stories, I've simply taken one short story so that I can show you how this is put together. Okay, so let's just start by saying that every short story has the same elements, right? And when we do the drama, which is going to be like a little cross section, you're going to notice that a lot of the same things come out. The only thing that's different is the content, right? So you have your plot, you have setting, characters, characterization, themes, narrator, conflict, suitability of the title. I know I ran through that, don't worry, I'm going to explain. Plot. What happens in the story? So, your plot will be comprised of your introduction, your rising action, your climax, your falling action, and your denouement or your conclusion. So, pardon, you've seen what I've just done, hey? You've seen me draw that little triangle. That little triangle is called Freytag's triangle, and that is what the plot is made up of. What happens in the story, okay? But please beware, it's not a retelling of the story, okay? It is, what is the event that introduces the story? What are the events that drive the story upward to its climax and then down the other side of the hill to its conclusion? Very important to remember that. Setting, where and when, time and place. Now, this is going to be, there's a new question, and I'm not sure if your teachers have told you this, but there's a new question in the NSC exam about setting. And tip to remember, please, when you are asked to give us the setting of a particular text, you must say where they are and you must say when. Let me give you an example. Where? At the school. When? After the father has seen Eva. Why am I using that? Because that's the story I'm going to teach you later on, okay? It's called The Last Breath. So that's how they want you to say the setting question. I'm going to go through it again, don't worry. Characters. Who are the people in the story? Characterization. What do they do? How do the actions of the characters develop the plot? So remember, they don't just do stuff. They do things, but they also interact with other characters. So that is what characterization is. The actions of the people, of the characters, and also the interactions with others. Because remember, if they didn't interact with others, we'd be in their head all the time. We wouldn't see how they behaved. So that would not allow for them to expose themselves. And the other important thing, this and this, it drives the plot. Okay? The characters and the interaction with one another is what drives the plot, is what moves you from the introduction to the rising action, to the climax, to the falling action, to the conclusion. None of that can happen if the people aren't interacting with one another. Right, the next one, themes. What are themes? Universal messages. What do I mean by that? So, can we all relate to something like being in love, like heartache, like disappointment, like judgment? Yes, we can. And when we are able to relate to what is happening in the story because of a theme, then we know it's a theme. It's a universal message. It's something that, although our experience with that might be different, same thing, we know what it's all about. And that's what a theme is. Guys, please don't say a theme is a universal message. You need to say, what is the message in order for you to get the mark? And generally, a theme question will be 3 marks. Okay? It will give you the theme and it will say discuss. Okay? So that's how that question will be asked. But like I said, I'm going to go through the exam skills in the next slide or in the next presentation in terms of how to answer the question. Narrator, who, first or third, is the person omniscient and looking from the outside in, or is the person part of the story? Okay? First person, I'm there. Third person, I'm not, I'm outside. Conflict. Do you remember? Conflict, climax, turning point. So when this particular thing happens, then it turns the entire story on its head. And now things are going to explode, and then we're going to have our falling action. Okay? And our conclusion. So that is what the conflict does. The title of a story. And they're going to ask you, they can ask you the question in terms of whether the title is suitable. So, remember I said I'm going to speak to you about the last breath. Is it a good title for the story? If we know what happens in there, then we can give an answer of 3 marks to say whether or not the title is indeed suitable and speaks to what happened in the story. Like I said again, these are just the elements. I'm going to discuss them in terms of the short story later on in the presentation. Right. Basic exam skills. You go into the venue and you get this paper. Okay, and it says paper 2. And you choose to do question 4 and 5. What do you do next when you see the question? You read the text. Okay, so now you've read the text. Please remember, guys, you need to be able to place the text in context. What do I mean? What happened before and what's going to happen after? Why? Because that's where your setting question is going to come in. They're going to want to know in the paper what is the setting of this extract. So you must place it in context. Right, now we get to the questions. How do we do that? Identify the instructional verb. What do I mean by that? So there are 3 little steps that you follow. Identify the instructional verb, identify content, identify limitation. Let me explain what I mean. That's just a formula. You're going to look at the question. Then they're going to say, one of the themes in this story is love. Discuss. What must you do? What is your instructional verb? Love, discuss. What must you do? You must discuss. So your instructional verb, you take your highlighter, you underline, I must discuss. What must you discuss? You must discuss the theme of love. That's your content. What's your limitation? It's the entire story. Please remember, grade 12, that sometimes it could be limited to just the text that you are reading. Okay? So if they say in this extract, your limitation changes. If they say in the story, your limitation is different. So you need to be sure that when you look at deconstructing your question, you know where they are telling you to go and look for that answer. How do you respond? This is how we answer. This is how we break the question apart. This is how we put the question back together. Point, evidence, explanation. So we give a point. We say, in terms of deconstructing the question, so I said theme is love. Point, yes, love is a theme. Evidence, explanation. Okay, or evidence and then explanation. We are going to say the love that Eva and the young man have for one another. We're going to speak about the love that the mother has for her son. We're going to speak about the love that the father has for his son and the sacrifices that they make and how they show that love to one another. And then we explain. So we have evidence. Eva says, wait before we get married. Explanation, because she wants to see this beautiful ring that he's going to give her. Okay? Like I said again, this is going to be so much simpler when we get to the actual story. So we've got 8 short stories, A Chip of Glass Ruby, Village People, The Fur Coat, The Doll's House, The Last Breath, Transforming Moments, Next Door, and The New Tribe. The elements, guys, are the same for all. The difficulty or the challenge is that you must remember 8 short stories will have 8 different settings. Okay? Each one has their own. They have 8 different characters, sets of characters. They have 8 different sets of themes. So please be sure to not mix and match because you can't do that. Okay? You cannot answer the question on fur coat based on the new tribe. You have to be sure to consolidate the themes per story. Okay? You can't mix and match. So, themes and characters. Now, how are the characters linked to a theme through their actions? Let me explain. Remember I spoke about the theme of love. I said love is a theme, discuss, that's the question. The characters in the story that I've chosen, the Last Breath, What does the young man do to show love? What does Eva do to show love? What does the dad do to show love? What does the mum do to show love? So that is how, through their actions, we link a character to a theme. Okay, so that's how that works. Now, this is the story that I've chosen, and I'm now going to give you a small little lesson on it so that you can understand the elements and how we answer our questions. Okay, so themes are the characters involved in a given theme. So the title of this story is The Last Breath. Right. Now, what does the last breath usually refer to? It usually refers to someone is going to die, with their last breath. They're going to do this, the death of someone. Or when someone is sticking to their point, I will defend this till my last breath. Okay, so they're not going to change their mind. So those are the two meanings of those words or that phrase, the last breath. We now have to decide, in the context of the short story, which one of the two are we looking at? Okay, and if we know the story, I'm going to tell it to you quickly. So there's this guy who's in love with this chick, she's blind, and his dad's like, no, can't marry a blind girl, she'll make your life difficult. And he's like, don't tell me how to live my life. And the mom's like, dude, don't be so hard on your dad, because your dad's going to die, and what. Dad's sad, and eventually the son feels, oh, shame. And what happens is, the dad does die. But before he dies, he gives Eva, the blind girl, who he initially said was not good enough for his son, he gives her his corneas, which gives her sight. So with his last breath, dying breath, he gives this woman sight. Okay, that's the story basically. So the turning point depends on both meanings of the last breath. And why is it effective? Because to his dying breath, he decides this woman must be able to see. And also, so he's not changing his mind about the fact that she must not be blind. And he also, with his last breath, makes sure that she gets sight. Okay. The setting of the story. Now remember guys, the story has a setting, but so do the extracts in your paper. And in your paper at the end of this year, they're going to ask you about extract. They're going to ask you, about setting. They're going to want you to say, it is at the school after the father has seen Eva. That's how they want you to answer. Okay? So the setting begins with a visit to the blind school and then ends with a visit at the graveside. Whose grave? The father. Because remember, he passes away, so they've now come full circle. The story ends in August. Okay? And the narrator's now on his way back with oranges and in his basket after he's visited his dad at the graveside. So that's now the setting. Please remember how I've said you must answer setting. This is the setting of the short story. This is not the setting of each and every extract. Because throughout the story, things happen at different places with events preceding it and events following it. You need to be able to say the exact point at which that happens. So they are in the lounge after they have had coffee, before they are going out. You need to be very detailed in that, right? So the plot for The Last Breath. Remember, I said the plot is Freytag's triangle. So, opening. The narrator is deeply in love with Eva. Blind girl plans to marry as soon as possible. So now, how do we know that? Because in the opening of the story, the beginning of the story, he says that this is now Eva, and they're gonna, how he sees, he calls it an angel. And that's the introduction to the story. Now, the father doesn't agree with him, and that is where everything starts to go wrong. Because he feels his father doesn't know anything. So he's upset because his father wants to prevent him from marrying this woman of his dreams. Because he's like, you don't know Eva, you just like being judgmental because she's blind, like you don't know her. And the father, however, feels, I want my son to not be burdened. Okay, so his perspective is parental. And the son's perspective, completely different. He's a young man in love. What you should be able to do, J12, is spare thought for both parties. Okay? Because you are going to want to say the father's being unfair or the father's being whatever. But before you answer that question, make sure that you are able to motivate. Okay? So spare thought for what the dad's going through. The narrator is angry because his dad is trying to prevent him from marrying Eva. He shouts to the dad, "Give her eyes." This is when they're driving back from the school. They've thought about this before, and when he does propose to Eva, she says that he must wait. Okay, so now remember, this is all going, it's all happening. Then Eva's going to the hospital for an operation. Because here she told him, you need to wait. Why? Because she says to him, I'm going to get eyes. And he's like, what do you mean? And now we realize, oh wow. He said to his dad, give her eyes. And his dad then realizes, because remember, his mom has also said to him, your dad's going to die of cancer. His father realizes that he has an opportunity to make both their dreams come true. He has an opportunity to make Eva see, which means he's going to feel better, and then his son can then marry Eva because with his blessing, because he is going to give her eyes. And then he says to Eva, will you marry me? And Eva says, no, you need to wait. And he's like, what? And then she says, like, why he needs to wait? Because she's going to the hospital for an operation. A mysterious donor who is near death has promised her his corneas. There is a chance that she might regain her sight. Do we know who that mysterious donor is? Yes, we do. It's the dad. Okay? And now, those interactions, okay, between Eva and the son and the mum and the mum and the dad and those interactions, they are what is driving the plot. Because if they didn't interact here, the father and the son, after having seen Eva, they wouldn't have gotten to the point where he is now angry and he says to his dad, give her eyes. And that would not then have sparked the idea of donating the corneas to Eva. So do you see how characterization, their interaction is what drives the plot, is what allows the next event to happen. Very important to understand that. Then the denouement, which is basically just the conclusion. It happens that Eva can see again and then they are now together. And then figuring it out. Oh, so the dad was actually the donor. So the plot, guys, is more than just a retelling of the story. Okay? Those are the events where the characters interact to move the story forward. Without those interactions, the story wouldn't move forward. If you look closely, you'll notice that the mum is not really mentioned, okay? Because she doesn't really drive the story. Yes, she supports him when he goes to her and she tells him about his dad. But that information it was inevitable that he would see his dad was sick, okay? And his mum is just, you get round characters and you get flat characters. Okay, and we know a lot more about him and how he thinks. His mom, all we know is she wants to be there for her son and she also wants to be there for her husband. Okay, but we don't know much more about her. So she's a pretty flat character, whereas the son is very round. He loves his father, but he feels his father wants to make decisions for him. He chose for him to go and work in the bank and he wanted to do music and he's upset about it. But he loves his father and he loves Eva and he wants to marry her and he feels he can make up his own mind. You know, so there's all these emotions going around. So the son's a round character, the mum flat. Also, not really part of this because she doesn't drive the plot. Okay. Now, here, I've written it out instead of the little column. The narrator is deeply in love with Eva. Okay? Then he's angry. So I've drawn a little picture for you. But these are the words. The son refuses to accept his father's opposition to this. His mother, what does she do? She informs the son about his father's desperate health condition. But now, like I said, does that really make a difference? The mum and how she is sort of included in the plot, because he knew that his dad wasn't well. He could hear the cough and whatever. He just didn't know what it was. And his mum sort of clarifies and she says, you know what, don't be so hard on your dad, because all that he wants is the best for you. So, and he doesn't have a lot of time. So, spare thought for you. Then, the climax, he goes and he says to Eva, will you marry me? Now remember, doesn't really have a ring. He uses a little copper ring. Because his proposal is not one of wanting to impress. And I know that some of you are going to think that he gave her a copper ring because he thought she's blind and she can't see, so she's not going to know. That's not why he gave her the copper ring. The reason he gave her that was because he couldn't afford anything better at the time. But he wanted Eva to know how he felt about her. He wanted Eva to know that regardless of the circumstances, he is choosing her. He wants to marry her. Okay? And so the ring is a symbol of his commitment to her. It's got nothing to do with whether or not he wants to fool her because she can't see it. It's about him committing to her, regardless of whether or not he can afford a diamond or a gold ring or whatever expensive metal. He's giving her his heart, and that's what's important. Okay? She asks him to wait. Why? Because she's not going to get her eyesight back, and we now know who the donor is. It's her dad, and then we now also know why Eva is able to see. But please look. He has donated his corneas to her with his last breath, and that's where the title comes in. Okay? So remember, we said it's twofold. Last breath in terms of he's going to die, and last breath in terms of him not changing his mind about Eva needing to be able to see if she's going to marry his son. Okay? So it's a very selfless act in terms of donating your eyes, but it's also a little bit selfish in terms of I'm making sure that I get my way. You will marry a woman who can see. And his son says that to him, so if she's blind, why don't you give her your eyes? Give her eyes so that she can see. And that sparks an idea with the dad. And that's exactly what he does. Okay? So, the character is in this story. Now remember, if you remember at the beginning, I said elements. Okay? And now we are on to characters. So we've discussed the plot, we've discussed the setting. Now, we are going into the elements of this particular short story. So what you need to do, guys, with this information, you need to take this and you need to take each short story and you need to go and say, these are the themes, this is the plot, this is the setting, these are the characters, this is how they interact with one another. Okay? I'm just going through this story so that you understand the skill that you need to be able to answer a short story. I'm not here to teach you the lesson about this because your teacher's done this. You've read this. What I'm saying is, this is how you are going to, for study purposes and to prep for the exam, this is how you're going to do it. Okay? So the narrator. Okay? Key characters in the story, center of events, passionate love and admiration for Eva. The narrator is the guy. He's the guy that wants to marry Eva. Okay? And he's very determined. He doesn't allow his father to dictate who he has to marry. He decides. He gives Eva a cheap copper ring instead of a shiny diamond ring. I just spoke about that. He doesn't give it to her because it's cheap. He gives it to her because he's giving his heart. And he would want to give her the shiny diamond, but he can't afford it. He's not prepared to compromise. He won't have anything standing in his way. He sees his father in a different light as he becomes aware of his father's sacrifice. You always had a kind heart, he says. Now, the idea of the father's sacrifice, also twofold, because sacrifice or wanting his way. Because he was going to die anyway. Like, I know it sounds cold, but think about it. The dad was going to die. He did something good with his last breath. Okay? By giving sight to Eva, and then also, in his own mind, making life easier on his son. Right? The father, he changed a little bit from an opposer to a donor because he gives his eyes. But now remember, he changes in as far as he ensures that his donation of eyes to Eva gives him what he wants, which is what? A woman who has sight to be his son's life partner because he feels blind. You are just going to make my child's life so hard. So the father still gets his way. He no longer opposes it. Why? Because he realizes his son's going to do whatever he wants to do. So he's like, I'm going to give you eyes because I am not going to need it because I'm going to be dead anyway. Okay, so how do you want to interpret the father's actions? Because you can now say, oh wow, he's such a good dad. Or you can say, yeah, but he wasn't going to need his eyes anyway. It's open to interpretation if you are able to motivate using the text. Okay? Then his opposition to his son's marriage is thinking of his son's welfare. What does that mean? I just said it now. He doesn't want his son to be burdened with a blind woman. When he's challenged to give her eyes, he makes the brave decision to, on his deathbed, give her his corneas. Okay, and it says brave, but like I say, open to interpretation. Because it is brave to give, to be a donor, but remember, his father had a twofold purpose for doing that. Okay, he wanted his son to be married to somebody with sight, but he also wanted his son to be happy. So he decided to give Eva his eyes. He donated his corneas for Eva to regain her eyesight. The mother, peacemaker. How do we know that? Because she says, your father's ill. Don't be so hard on him. She loves her son, she loves her husband, and she would want him to obey the father's wishes, probably because the father's dying. She likes Eva, and she doesn't have to convince her son not to marry Eva. So because she's a peacemaker, she would want her husband to be pleased. Because she doesn't live with Eva, she lives with her husband. And she also knows he's dying. So she kind of would like to just keep the peace. But she's open-minded enough to also see Eva for who she is and understand that my son loves this girl and she is good for him. Okay? At the end, she accepts Eva into her family. Eva, she's the blind lady at school. She's passionately loved by the narrator. Now, the idea that she's at school doesn't mean that she's a scholar. Okay? It just means that she lives at that at that particular location because she's blind. So everything happens there for her. Okay, she's not a scholar. She receives corneas from a mysterious donor, which we now know is the dad, and she regains her eyesight. Okay, picture of Eva, just for interest sake for you to imagine what that looks like. Theme. Okay. Scene and sight. Okay? Figurative, being blind. Blind in what way? Seeing in what way? So Eva is literally blind, eh? She can't see. Okay? And then she gets corneas from the father. But now, the father can't see that this is what his son wants. That this is the woman that is going to make his son happy. So that literal and figurative idea of blindness and having sight needs to be considered in terms of these two characters, Eva and the father. Okay? So we can easily, if you read here, it says, we can misunderstand other people's motives because we have our own limited point of view. Now that is a theme, guys. Remember I said universal message. Has it happened that because we don't consider things from someone else's perspective, we kind of don't understand why they're doing it? Okay? So the narrator is blind to his dad's responses and motives. Why is his dad doing it? His dad wants to make sure that his son ultimately is not burdened. Okay? And his son's like, you don't know Eva, you have no idea. And he thinks that his dad is thinking badly of Eva. Ultimately, his dad doesn't want him to be burdened. So he's not thinking with the perspective of his dad, or from his dad's perspective. He's thinking from his own perspective as a young man in love and feeling, but how can my dad say this? You don't even know her. So because of that, he judges his dad a little bit harshly. So, and another thing, parents and children have different views on what is best, and it leads to conflict. So are you understanding when I'm saying that themes are universal messages? Your father or mother might not, it's not an Eva that you have, but there's something is your Eva, something where you guys don't agree on how things should be done. Okay, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about universal messages. So you can read through that one on your own, okay, because eventually he realizes why his dad said what he said and why he did what he did. Okay, so there are some resources, okay, and this is the resource for Mind the Gap, okay, for the short stories. And you're allowed to go onto that little website that I've given you there, and you can go and look at all of these. Whatever I've done now, let's just go back to the beginning. I just want to remind you of something. This. You will be able to find this for all 8 short stories in the link that I've given you at the end of the presentation. I would like you to bear in mind, grade 12, that there are different ways in which the paper will be set. Okay? You can go and you can use past papers, and those will definitely help you. Please, however, bear in mind, the paper is going to ask you a new question on setting, and you need to understand how to answer that. If you watch the next little presentation that I have, which will be a drama presentation, I'm going to explain to you a little bit more about the science of the paper, which will cover how these questions will be asked. What I've done here, given you a basic idea about short stories. If you are able to understand this, you will be fine. I trust that you've enjoyed the presentation. Thank you very, very much.